I want to cover one other story that's interesting that I came across yesterday that's a little bit more serious and a little bit more chilling. And it's basically, partly I just want to make all of you aware of it so you can keep an eye on it. And this is a new piece of legislation that I find extremely threatening. This is from Truth Out. Now, Truth Out is a lefty site, right? But they share our concerns on civil liberties. Now, this is the article. Movement media are fighting for Palestinian liberation and against censorship. So you look at this and say, these are not my people necessarily. Now, some of you will say these are my people, but a lot of you won't. But in this article is something quite interesting. In fact, I went down the rabbit hole a little bit. I went back to my old job of reading legislation, which I can assure you is not much fun, especially the way it's written by people who do not work for someone called Ron Paul. I try to dig into this legislation, but let me just tell you a little bit about what Truth Out says about this piece of legislation. Go ahead and go to the next one. A bill currently making its way through Congress could kill independent media outlets like ours. Now that sounds like a pitch for donations at first, but I kept reading yesterday. So H.R. 9495 is a bipartisan piece of legislation. Now, that's a bad sign. Ostensibly about allowing U.S. nationals wrongfully detained abroad to postpone their tax deadlines. It sounds relatively innocuous, but this bill also includes the text of another bill. By the way, that's a very common thing. One that made it through the House earlier this spring, and I've highlighted this. It gives the Treasury Secretary the discretion to deem a nonprofit a, quote, terrorist supporting organization, which would strip them of their tax-exempt status. Now, this is important because a lot of the First Amendment killing moves by governments since 2020 have gone, and before then, by the way, they've not been able to run it through Congress, et cetera. So what they do is they run it through the Treasury Secretary and OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control, and they're the ones who are able to attack it not on First Amendment grounds, but on financial grounds. That's how they got away with the latest attacks on RT and Sputnik and a few others, is through OFAC. So it's going to give the Treasury Secretary, whoever that may be, the discretion to deem a nonprofit a terrorist supporting organization. Go to the next one now. This kind of sweeping jurisdiction should terrify anyone who cares at all about civil liberties. It should especially concern readers of nonprofit media, and I would add nonprofit organizations. The bill can have compounding effects. Some outlets might self-censor. We saw a lot of that during COVID. Organizations might spend limited funds and time defending themselves from any old hateful threat that comes their way. Donations may dry up as funders worry about whether they can face some kind of penalty of their own. The terror label is already powerful, this Truth Out article continues. It can freeze assets and spark investigations. And this bill creates a whole new category, critical few words, that of a terrorist supporting organization that can poison by association alone. Now go on a little bit further. I just want to get this down because here's the real point. One could make any number of critiques of this bill. It puts a terrifying amount of power in the hands of a political appointee, i.e. the Treasury Secretary, who could easily weaponize it against any enemy of their choosing. It's unconstitutional, likely, and this is the point they make this important, it's also redundant. Providing material support to organizations on the U.S. list of foreign terror organizations is already illegal under a whole host of legislation that already exists. And that is important. It is already illegal. If the government goes through the process of designating an entity or a country a terrorist supporting entity or country, it is already illegal to provide any material support. What this is doing is something very different and much more insidious. It's creating a whole new category solely in the hands of the Treasury Secretary and, of course, the deep state behind that person to categorize anything they don't want or don't like as a terrorist supporting entity. Now, some of our friends on the right might look at this and say, well, all these Palestinian protesters are a bunch of terrorists anyway. They deserve it. They've got it going to them. Well, guess what? What goes around comes around, because especially if someone like Kamala wins, who's not a fan and not a friend of free speech and not a friend of organizations that she doesn't like, because you'll have Hillary whispering in her ear. You can better believe that. It's going to come back to haunt you, because I just did a very, very narrow dive, not a deep dive, into what kinds of organizations, if Kamala wins or someone like her, who they might be targeting. And this is from a Newsweek article very recently. I think it was actually a couple of days ago, written by William Arkin. FBI targets Trump followers as the 2024 election nears. Now go to the next one. This is from that article. The federal government believes the threat of violence and major civil disturbances around the 2024 U.S. presidential election is so great that it's quietly created a new category of extremists that it seeks to track and counter: Donald Trump's army of MAGA followers. The challenge for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the primary federal agency charged with law enforcement, is to pursue and prevent, and I highlight this, what it calls domestic terrorism. So, those of you smugly thinking, yes, let's take out these Palestine protesters, let's take out these lefties, these annoying lefties, these Hamas lovers. Well, guess what? They're coming for you. They're coming for all the conservative alternative media as well. You better believe it. You better believe it. And when you give the power of being able to silence an organization or a news outlet in the hands of one political appointee, you've got trouble. And you say, well, come on, that's not what the law says. Well, let's look a little bit at legislation. Let's go to HR 9495. This is what it looks like in the cover. It basically says what it is. So you go down to Section 4. If you go to the next one, here's where it gets juicy. Section 4, termination of tax-exempt status of terrorist-supporting organizations. Now, it sounds, again, ominous. Who was terrorist-supporting organization? What does that mean? What are the definitions? Well, there are none. And if you go to the next one, except for this, terrorist-supporting organizations. Now, this is where it's obvious in the legislation. For the purpose of this paragraph, the term terrorist-supporting organization means any organization designated by the Secretary as having provided during a 3-year period ending on the date of such designation material support or resources within the meaning of section, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all determined by the Treasury Secretary. And you'd say, well, hang on, if you're providing support for terrorism, then maybe you should have some problems. But the strange thing is, if you're actually supporting terrorism, according to this, well, you only get your tax-exempt status taken away. No, that's not the case. Let's go to the U.S. Code. I dug deeper yesterday. Here's the U.S. Code. This is the Cornell Law Library. 18 U.S. Code 2339B, providing material support or resources to designated foreign terrorist organizations. Go to the next one. This is U.S. Code. It says, whoever knowingly provides material support or resources to a foreign terrorist organization or attempts or conspires to do so shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both, and if the death of any person results, shall be in prison for any term of years or for life. So we have a means by which to determine that you are really a terrorist or a supporting organization. That means you provide material support to terrorist groups. Now we can quibble about that, about who really qualifies for that, but that's on the books. What they're doing here, guys, folks, is they are putting the bar way, way lower. Hey, we can't prove that you are supporting terrorism, but you have challenged the narrative on, name the issue, Ukraine. Ukraine's not winning. Well, Russia's acting like terrorists. If you put out an article saying that, you're terrorist supporting. Israel's slaughtering Palestinians. They're slaughtering people in Lebanon. Well, that's you seem to be siding with the terrorists, sir. We're going to shut down your organization. We won't shut it down, actually, because we can't do that. But we'll take away your tax-exempt status, and we will put a scarlet letter on you to terrify anyone into not giving you another penny. This is chilling, folks. This is really chilling stuff. Keep your eyes out. The war on speech is up and running. And it's not right-wing. It's not left-wing. Don't get in that mental cage. It's them versus us, people who believe in liberty and freedom. So I want to do one final thing, which is to remind everyone that we survive on your tax-deductible donations. If you go to that last clip, please. And I've included a link in the description to where you can go and support the Ron Paul Institute, which is the home of the Ron Paul Liberty Report. We cannot continue to challenge the machine, to speak out for peace, regardless of who is in office, and to criticize the warmongers and bad guys. We can't do it without you. So please, if you can see it in your hearts, to give us a donation, make it a monthly donation. That would be awesome. If you can do that, we will appreciate it. And I appreciate you watching the Liberty Report with just me and not Dr. Paul, who's much more entertaining and intelligent than I am. And I do hope that you'll return to the Liberty Report soon.